Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 109, and on last week's episode, which was episode number 108, which was focused on The World's Insane by Vardis. At the end of that video, it was where I had announced what was going to be this week's album of the week pick, and since we are here today, you can see the title and you see the artwork. Yes, it is the 5th studio album from Ritchie Blackmore's solo project. It is Rainbow with Difficult to Cure, which was originally released on February 3rd, 1981. And yes, it was released on February 3rd. So that means, and since we are past the month of February, I mean, that was like, what, 2 months ago? Well, or at least 3 months, because of this is here, we're really early in May. That means it has hit its 40th anniversary. And of course, I was tempted on spotlighting this around its day, or at least around its week of anniversary. I decided to push it back because of it was going to then run into, because I wanted to at least also around that same week, I think I was going to spotlight instead, because the time that this album was released, a few days later or so, I mean, I think was like either Fire Down Under or Moving Pictures would end up getting released, and so since I was running into that, I decided to push back Difficult to Cure to at least a bit later within the months, and since because of the thing is, as much as I do kind of, I have a very much a soft spot and a very nostalgic relationship with this album. I wanted to really focus on those two albums instead. So it just made more sense on pushing this one back. But at least I'm finally here to talk about Difficult to Cure from Rainbow. And since I've really never talked about Rainbow, the only other project I will ever talk about when it comes to at least Ritchie Blackmore in general, it's usually going to be Deep Purple. And since I've done more album of the week episodes, and at least on Deep Purple, I mean, I've done one on in rock, and of course soon here, at least within this month, there'll be Fireball. I've just done more spotlights on Deep Purple than really Rainbow. The only closest I've ever really spotlighting anything from Rainbow was when I did my 70s Hard and Heavy month in 2018, where I at least one of those episodes I had at least used, or at least just talked about that album, and of course then using the song Snake Charmer off of that record. And then of course when Jimmy Bain sadly had passed away, I of course talked about the live record, Rainbow Live, or Rainbow on Stage. Again, that's the only really closest I ever got to really talking about Rainbow. So here, and this is going to be good. And at the same time, I'm also since I really haven't done any other spotlight on Rainbow, for the most part of this beginning, I'm gonna be going through at least the beginnings of Ritchie Blackmore, starting Rainbow, just everything leading up to Difficult to Cure, and that means also running through most of the lineups, because of Ritchie Blackmore ran through a lot of lineups. I mean, he probably ran through more than David Coverdale had, though the only person that ever could at least top Ritchie Blackmore in that department would be Yngwie Malmsteen, but that's because of Yngwie Malmsteen has a much more bigger ego than Ritchie Blackmore and David Coverdale, or any of those guys. Though I think David Coverdale is probably, softened. I think, if anything, his ego isn't as big as Ritchie Blackmore, and it certainly isn't as big as Yngwie's, because Yngwie really thinks he is this modern-day fucking Ritchie Blackmore, which he can't even hold Ritchie Blackmore's jock strap. So, there we go. Okay, let's definitely get into Rainbow. So, how did Ritchie Blackmore form Rainbow? Well, we have to go all the way back to 1974 with the album Stormbringer, which was the follow-up to 1974's, just at early of that year, Burn, which saw the debut for the two new members who are replacing Ian Gillan and Roger Glover, that being David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. So right after that album became a pretty good hit. It was actually, again, it showed that that Deep Purple can go on even without the two members such as Ian Gillan, who was a powerhouse vocalist, and of course Roger Glover. So they definitely show that they can still make a good record after that. And Burn is, in many ways, when you're listing out some of the best Deep Purple albums, Burn is going to be there next, like Machine Head or Deep Purple and Rock. For the most part, it is going to. So it was pretty much a successful album for them. And so when it came to recording Stormbringer, Ritchie Blackmore really had the idea of recording a cover of Black Sheep of the Family, which, depending on the Metal Archives or the Wikipedia, it's either a cover of The Hill or Quartermass. But the thing is, Steve Hammond actually wrote the song, and I think depending on the year when any of their two records came out, I think I have more of a better hunch that I think Quartermass's version came out first, and then Steve Hammond, I think, recorded his a little later, because of You Can't on that Hill record that has the track Black Sheep. There's really not a definitive day that it was released, but they were released the same year. So I guess in many ways, it's probably better to just say it's a Quartermass cover here, even though Steve Hammond wrote it for them. So there we go. I just want to throw that little tidbit of facts in there. Still, Ritchie Blackmore wanted to record a cover of that song, and he brought the idea to at least most of the members, but they weren't on board with it. Especially, apparently, even John Lord wasn't on board with it. I think the reason they probably weren't on board is because of during their early years, those first three albums that came out in the late 1960s, they had pretty much done a bunch of covers. Those albums were written with covers. The song Hush was a cover. It wasn't their song, but it was the first big hit they really had. So I think for them, in their mindset, they probably just thought that they just didn't want to go back down that road again on doing more covers. They wanted to focus on writing their own original material. However, that didn't sit well with Ritchie Blackmore. He felt like he got pretty much turned down. He got burnt. It left a bit of a sour taste in his mouth. And I guess really, according to Ritchie Blackmore, that's how he pretty much felt if you ever listen to some of his interviews. And so it's never been quite at least determined on what month or when he decided to at least to go out of his way to go and find a band to possibly record his version of Black Sheep of the Family. Whether or not he did this during when the band was on tour still, or he did it after the tour, basically filling up all those tour dates before he went and decided to pursue the idea of finding a band just to record this version of Black Sheep of the Family. Eventually he did, and he found Elf, which at least at this point was the remaining lineup of Elf. And this, of course, began the relationship with him and Ronnie James Dio. So he jams with the remaining lineup of Elf, and just for this version of Black Sheep of the Family. And he's so impressed that he decides that he is going to no longer be active, just be an active member of Deep Purple. So I think he must have brought it to at least the band members then to tell him that he's no longer going to be a part of a band that he pretty much helped create. I mean, while Ian Pace and John Lord were definitely founding members, Ritchie Blackmore, I think, was another founding member as well. He was one of the key elements to Deep Purple's sound and even at times success. And of course that would get tested many years later. Still, he was a key part, and in many ways, Deep Purple was almost considered a bit of a bit of Richie Blackmore's child, if you really think about it, in that sort of aspect. Because again, it was such a key part of his career. But again, apparently, since he was going so in and out, in terms of his relationship was dwindling. Of course, when Stormbringer did release, Richie Blackmore hated the record. He thought it was the most biggest piece of shit that was released on the entire earth. And I mean, when it came to finally being with the band Rainbow, Richie Blackmore told the story how one of the members of Rainbow, he didn't really specify which member. I think it was Cozy Powell, I think he said. And he remembered that he was throwing on Stormbringer, and he literally took it off the turntable and threw it out the window. He just didn't want to ever listen to that record ever again. He pretty much was just going to leave all that behind. So all of that sort of experience left a sour taste in Richie Blackmore's mouth. So that's why he decided to then pursue with his new baby child, that being Rainbow. And so that's when finally, on August 4th, 1975, sees the debut of Richie Blackmore's first solo record, that being Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, with his new band Rainbow. Yes, I know this, it's a little redundant and repetitive there, but bear with me. And this also ended up seeing, since anything he had did with Deep Purple, another big hit, or at least another good big hit for him, that being Man on the Silver Mountain, which became a concert staple not just for Richie Blackmore, but also for Ronnie James Dio over the years. So it really just, it also sewed in the places, the whole history, everything was getting sewn for, at least for Ronnie James Dio as well, for his career. Everything was getting sewn with this debut album. And so they tour for this one, and eventually, though, I don't know what happened. I didn't decide to read up any of the backstory on why at least most of the members left after this album. I mean, the only person that decided to remain with Richie Blackmore was Ronnie James Dio. But the members such as Craig Gruber, Gary Driscoll, and Mickey Lee Soley, they all decide to know, either he fired them or they just left the band. So eventually they left, and after that, he decides to then put in a newer lineup for his next album, that being the classic album in pretty much in Richie Blackmore or Deep Purple's just in his discography, that being Rainbow Rising, which was pretty much consisted of the members of, again, Richie Blackmore, Ronnie James Dio, and drummer Cozy Powell. Or I think it's either at least pronounced Cozy Powell, but I think it's Cozy Powell. Him, new keyboard player Tony Carey, and then of course new bass player, that being Jimmy Bain. And so this lineup here pretty much lasted from Rising to, of course, On Stage. However, after On Stage, I don't know what happened, but Jimmy Bain, I guess, decided to leave the band. And that's when they, for at least beginning to then record Long Live Rock and Roll, which will be the final album with, Ronnie James Dio on vocals. Richie Blackmore then decides that he's going to at least to provide the bass parts for that album. So eventually that happens. He records again, and of course then gets a new keyboard player in David Stone. So Long Live Rock and Roll comes out on April 9th, 1978. And that's, again, it does become a bit of a classic too in its own right, because it provided two other big hits for Rainbow and other good concert staples for both Richie Blackmore and Ronnie James Dio. I mean, Long Live Rock and Roll, Kill the King, and of course I forgot to also mention on Rising, Starstruck, or Lady Starstruck. Again, just great. Those of course provide a lot of big hits for and just concert staples. Though this would be it. And of course, it was also the final album, at least with Martin Birch producing for Ritchie Blackmore. So this was the final album. I think it's never been quite. I think Ronnie James Dio, I think, briefly talked about how I think the relationship between him and Ritchie Blackmore was just kind of, they were no longer seeing eye to eye. I think, if anything, he kind of could see how very egotistical Ritchie Blackmore kind of was, because if you had seen one of the recent documentaries, or at least interviews with Ritchie Blackmore, you could kind of tell that his tastes in music was changing, and what sounds he wanted always changed. And for a while, he gets sick and tired of a certain vocalist or whatnot, like he did with Ian Gillan. He gets sick and tired of one thing and decides to go along and do another and pursue something else, basically. When it came to a thing, because of, and it will eventually, I'll get into why he pursued the sound he did, beginning with albums like, for example, here, Down to Earth, and this album that I'm going to be talking about here, that I'm spotlighting. The sounds just change. And it just was he was no longer wanting to do the more darker kind of stuff that really began with like Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, and then into 1978's Long Live Rock and Roll. So that's kind of it. So he doesn't want to pursue any of that stuff anymore. When it comes to at least maybe late 78 or early 1979, wanting to write and record Down to Earth, the fourth studio album, again, the one that's following Long Live Rock and Roll, he finally is able to get a new lineup. And so, of course, he keeps Cozy Powell, though, so this will be the final album for Cozy Powell and Rainbow and Ritchie Blackmore. He finds a new lineup. That, of course, being reconnected with his old Deep Purple bandmate, Roger Glover, who, of course, would produce this album and would take over at least Martin Birch's duties. He reconnects with Roger Glover. He gets new keyboard player in Don Airey, and then new vocalist Graham Bonnet, which Graham Bonnet would then go on then sing in plenty of bands. One for being Michael Schenker Group, which Don Airey also had worked with. Same goes for Roger Glover too, producing the first Michael Schenker Group album. So, and then I might touch a little bit on that, maybe, I don't know, even though I did spotlight that album. So all these members would, in some cases, would. So Cozy Powell as well. That's kind of funny, all right. And I guess in many ways, Michael Schenker was also trying to kind of take most of the other sort of members Ritchie Blackmore had. So I guess he had to have been a big fan of his. I don't know. Even though they got a similar sort of playing, I guess. All right, I don't want to go on that sort of tangent, and that's going to take up the rest of this video on trying to compare Ritchie Blackmore to Michael Schenker or whatnot. Still, this is the new lineup, and then they record Down to Earth, and then it finally comes out on July 28th, 1979 through Polydor Records. And so it does contain another sort of big hit for him in songs like, All Night Long, Since You've Been Gone, and then Eyes of the World was kind of a minor hit too. So, and this was a little bit of a different change. It was more of a transitional. There's still a little bit of that sort of sound of those first three albums, but you can tell he's kind of going in a more lighter direction. It's not nearly the sort of dark, almost medieval style sort of proto-metal of those early albums with Ronnie James Dio on vocals. In many ways, again, they almost are kind of considered metal anyways. I mean, Rising is actually probably one of the most heaviest records to come out in 1976. It was a very heavy record. I mean, it also contained one of the first, in my view, the earliest power metal songs to come out that year, or speed metal tracks, that being A Light in the Black. But he was moving far away from that sort of sound, and he wanted to go into more of a commercial direction. He was just starting to really absolutely become in love, apparently, with the sound of bands like Foreigner, for example. He wanted to chase that sound. So again, just the overall big emphasis on vocals and somewhat more arena, just big guitar riffs and overall just big enough. Just the production and the sound is everything he wanted. That sort of he just wanted that. And he kind of got close, but the thing is, Graham Bonnet, you really can't say is anywhere near the sort of voice of Lou Gramm. If anything, I actually prefer the voice of Graham Bonnet, because I think he's a fantastic singer. He also, again, sang on friggin' Assault Attack. Great fucking record. Still, I don't know what's I guess... I don't know what was the big issue with Ritchie Blackmore and Graham Bonnet. I don't know. Maybe it might have been the same issues that Michael Schenker had with Graham Bonnet. Because I know that when it came to touring for the Assault Attack album, the story's been told, Graham Bonnet got so freaking drunk that he was almost just immobile to fucking sing. He couldn't even do anything. He couldn't even walk. Couldn't do it. He couldn't even come up with any sort of coherent sentence. Again, he was just dead drunk. So that was it. He kicked him out. So I don't know if that was the same issue, but as far as the sort of brief, at least insight into Ritchie Blackmore's thoughts on Graham Bonnet, while he kind of did like, I mean, he wouldn't have chosen him if he didn't like his voice. But the thing is, I guess he had a problem with the issues with Graham Bonnet's look. Because apparently he had an issue with this sort of buzz haircut. Because of, again, he thought that there was just that neck. He made the comment that there was just no hair covering that neck. He almost felt like he wanted to take a Stratocaster and use like a fucking axe, apparently, just to whack the back of his neck. Because of that's how he had a problem with it. So there was it was kind of funny the way he pronounced that, how the way he said it. But and just envisioning Ritchie Blackmore just taking his fucking guitar and just striking it at the back of Graham Bonnet's neck because of that whole sort of space. It's funny. It's a funny visual. But I guess that might be the insight into Ritchie Blackmore's sort of negatives on Graham Bonnet. So after this album, he went last. That was it. And then, of course, Cozy Powell then leaves. And goes on later on, will then end up playing with Michael Schenker. And of course, Ritchie Blackmore always, I think he did say he had at least a pretty much a soft spot for Cozy Powell. He really thought he was a great drummer. So I think Cozy, was one that left instead of staying with. But again, it seemed like he liked him as a friend or whatnot. I think he was one of the few people he really had at least a good thing to really say about. By 1980, Graham Bonnet was originally planned to be the singer for Difficult to Cure. And the only thing that has surfaced from this early session of Graham Bonnet singing on at least or anything for Difficult to Cure was again their cover of I Surrender, which was a Russ Ballard track. That's the only thing that's left. After that, Graham Bonnet is out of the band, and so now Ritchie Blackmore is on to now searching for a replacement now. Again, he's back to finding more replacements. And so what he finally comes to, apparently he must have at least heard the record, because of he I guess must have heard a Fandango record, and then that's how he was like, there's my singer. He finally finds his Lou Gramm, that being of course none other than new guy Jolin Turner. And so, and of course then finding a new drummer in Bob Rondinelli, who would then go on and do plenty of other stuff as well with plenty of other bands, apparently even drumming for Doro on her solo record after Warlock. So there we go. He finds his new lineup here, and that's where he finally head into the recording process for Difficult to Cure. So with this new lineup of Ritchie Blackmore, Don Airey, Roger Glover, Bob Rondinelli, and Jolin Turner, he goes into the studio at least sometime in 1980, which is Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen, Denmark, and Kingdom Sound Studios in Long Island, New York as well, to record Difficult to Cure. And on engineer, we have actually one of the earliest stuff for Flemming Rasmussen before he goes on becomes one of the biggest producers for Metallica and so on, and even Pretty Maids. Goes on and finds he's on board, and again being produced by Roger Glover. album is finally released on February 3rd, 1981 through Polydor Records. So we finally are here. We are finally here at the 5th studio album, Difficult to Cure from Rainbow. And what a long-winded fucking, it is ridiculous how many lineups Richie Blackmore had to go through just to get and record a fucking record. It was just, again, it was a revolving door. And so finally, he just secures his lineup, and that's here with Difficult to Cure. So let's get into this album finally, since I spent most of the time going through the backstory, just everything just leading up, the lineup changes, and whatnot. We're here. I know it was daunting, but we're finally here. Let's definitely do a track listing run-up for this album. We have at least about 9 songs here, and it all clocks in at 42 minutes and 53 seconds. So we got, of course, I Surrender being a Russ Ballard cover, Spotlight Kid, No Release, Magic being a Brian Moran cover, I think, or at least it's one of the writers. So I don't know if it was at least part of a band. Let's actually completely see. Yeah, I think it was written by him. I think it is. It's not really Richie Blackmore's track. So, again, there... let me see if I can completely pronounce this. But, Vielleicht das Nest Mal. I know I butchered the hell out of that. Which apparently is... it means maybe next time, basically, and it's an instrumental. Then Can't Happen Here, Freedom Fighter, Midtown Tunnel Vision, and then a traditional sort of track being Beethoven's Ninth, which is actually being titled here as Difficult to Cure, another instrumental. So there, and of course that's Richie Blackmore's sort of just his fascination with these sort of just symphonic or neoclassical style, just completely progressions and whatnot. Okay, where do I really begin with this album? And I'll then also comment on the artwork as well, because there's actually a pretty interesting story there, actually a real nice tie-in to another sort of classic British rock band or metal band. But here, again, his fascination with the sounds of Foreigner really comes to forth on this album. Of course, again, I've got a big soft spot with this record, and I'll tell you why. This is actually my first introduction to anything Rainbow related. This was my introduction. I mean, I knew of Richie Blackmore and Deep Purple. I mean, my first taste of Richie Blackmore and Deep Purple was Machine Head with the song Highway Star. Again, finding that CD in a box of CDs in my parents' closet as a very young kid, and putting it on in the CD player, or at least it had to have been either PS1, and just being taken back by the sounds of that album. I just couldn't believe what I heard, and so that was my introduction to, of course, to Richie Blackmore in general. And then I also even knew of, again, Ronnie James Dio, also because I do remember somewhat listening to Dehumanizer by Black Sabbath. That was also my introduction to the Dio era of Black Sabbath, actually. So I knew about that. However, the first thing I ever heard of Rainbow, and it goes back to my memories, because this is how I remember things. I can't remember if I'm going to pick up one of my, either my brother or my sister, I think, from school. I might have been homesick. I think, if anything, I think what it was is I either was leaving school and my sister's class was yet done, or I think that's how I remember. I'm inside the car, and what's playing in my dad's car stereo is Spotlight Kid. And I'm like wondering, at first I'm seeing the case that this apparently is in. At first I thought it was Red Hot Chili Peppers, because that's where the disc apparently was put into. He didn't really keep most of the fucking CDs in the case, so it was kind of weird, like, what the fuck? I don't recall these guys sounding like this. This is kind of odd. Eventually, turns out it's Rainbow. It's Richie Blackmore. And that's, again, that was my memories, and that really was my absolute favorite song off this album, as being Spotlight Kid. If you want to know one of the main reasons for why Don Airey became at least was the replacement for Jon Lord in Deep Purple, and why he's been in Deep Purple for pretty much since 2003, I think is his work on this album. I think is one reason why. Of course, Roger Glover being the bass player here. Of course, Ritchie Blackmore being a former Deep Purple member. One of the key elements of Deep Purple. The way Don Airey is playing is just, again, just the way he's playing off of Ritchie Blackmore's guitar playing, whether it being on Spotlight Kid or even the final track, Difficult to Cure. You really can hear that he was a great replacement for Jon Lord. I mean, of course, Don Airey did a lot of stuff with Ozzy, Michael Schenker, and even Judas Priest later on. However, his work on this album and the way with some of his keyboard, I mean, on the track Difficult to Cure, during that middle part, he actually does break out that sort of Hammond organ sound. And he really, at many ways, you could tell he definitely studied the sort of stuff of Jon Lord because of the way he's playing, or even at times maybe even or Ken Hensley in some cases too. Just the way he's just how he's just providing his solo, and the way it just comes off, and the way his musicianship, and the way it's just fantastic. It's probably the closest you're ever going to get on this album that really harkens back to that sort of classic Deep Purple sort of sound. It's only sort of resemblance. And of course with Spotlight Kid with that sort of middle sort of guitar, just that is sort of playing between Don Airey and Ritchie Blackmore, where it's definitely more sort of that almost neoclassical kind of guitar soloing and just jamming. Again, that's probably as times you're going to get the closest to at least the Rainbow sort of sound on like Rainbow Rising. But at the same time, there's still somewhat a little bit of that hints of classic Deep Purple. And again, that's really found in songs like Difficult to Cure and Spotlight Kid. And maybe even in some cases on Midtown Tunnel Vision, which let me briefly talk about this. This is usually considered, depending on who you really are talking to, this is usually considered apparently the weakest song on the album. Even people who are fans of the song really tend to really rate Midtown Tunnel Vision as the low point of this album, which I've never really understood, because I actually kind of like this track. Yes, Ritchie Blackmore is trying his best to recreate Mistreated in the way it plays, and there's a little bit of that sort of Jimi Hendrix style sort of just overall picking it to this track, but at the same time, I think it's actually the closest you're going to get to sort of that more sort of blues, sort of or heavy sort of blues stuff of the early material. It's the closest you're going to get to it. And I actually think it's a good song. The only sort of knock I can give it is that I think Joe Lynn Turner might be the weak point for this song, is because of, again, his Lou Gramm style vocals, which is fair. Again, his smooth crooning like voice doesn't completely work with it. If this was sung by Ronnie James Dio, I think it actually would have worked very good. Or maybe even Ian Gillan. Just my personal preference. I think it would have been even more of a really good track. Or David Coverdale. Any of those three, I think would have done this song more justice. But again, Ritchie Blackmore was so fixated with that sort of Lou Gramm style vocals that he had to really have that sound. And so Midtown Tunnel Vision is like completely at least plagued with that kind of sound. I don't want to completely talk bad about Foreigner, because I actually do kind of dig them. At least the first three. Alright, at least the first three. But for Ritchie Blackmore to go after that sound is just absolutely what was weird. And again, it's definitely heard on songs like, for example, his cover Russ Ballard, I Surrender, which is actually, if you ask me, the most overrated track off this album. I don't get why this song is so liked. I don't get why Ritchie Blackmore is so fixated. It's not like it's fucking Riding with the Angels, which is probably the only other good song that I think any band that has ever covered a Russ Ballard track is. It's Riding with the Angels is probably the only good one. I mean, Samson, for example. So it's not like it's that. I don't get the fucking fixation with this track. Maybe Russ Ballard did it great earlier on, but I don't get the fucking fixation with this one. Same goes for Magic, which is the weakest song off this one. for the people that say that Midtown Tunnel Vision is the weakest song here, Magic. I'm sorry. If I were to take out 82 songs off this one, it would be I Surrender and Magic. Because really, at the same time, I don't hate these songs. At the same time, if I'm really going to put this album on again and again and again, I'm just going to skip these 2 fucking songs, okay? Again, Spotlight Kid, No Release, Can't Happen Here, Freedom Fighter, Midtown Tunnel Vision, even Difficult to Cure are probably the best stuff on this album for me. I mean, yes, this may not be Richie Blackmore's most finest moment. Again, it's nowhere. It's not going to touch any of the stuff with Dio, or any of his stuff with Deep Purple. But it's still an enjoyable album, and there still is some good stuff. Again, I do like Spotlight Kid, which is actually the absolute best song on this album. No Release, I do somewhat dig as well. Can't Happen Here is a fine sort of fun melodic rocker. It's actually of the more other Foreigners sort of sounding tracks on this one. Can't Happen Here is a fine hard rocker, and I think it's actually one of the better of the more executed of that. Freedom Fighter I also really dig as well. It's another sort of cool sort of very good galloping style rocker. Again, plenty of Richie Blackmore's tasty riffs are on this track. No Release might have that sort of slick sort of commercial sound to it, but it's fine. The instrumental here, at least of the 2, I think maybe Next Time might be the weakest, even though it does have a sort of Michael Schenker style thing going on. Again, Richie Blackmore may be the originator of that sort of guitar playing, because again, Michael Schenker definitely is in that sort of same category. The way his cadence is of his playing is very similar, but I think Richie Blackmore just has a little bit, I think if anything, did it the best. But Richie Blackmore is alright with this track. But again, it's far from at least the best thing Richie Blackmore's done. It's a nice sort of calm track, but it's not one I'm going to at least to revisit a lot. Not like with Spotlight Kid, No Release, and Can't Happen Here, Freedom Fighter, and Midtown Tunnel Vision, and even, of course, the title track, basically, again, being Beethoven's Ninth. I'm going to revisit these songs more than on this. But as an album as a whole, it's not a bad record. And again, and this is probably this is one of the many reasons why I was hesitant on spotlighting this earlier on, because of putting this album over albums like even Moving Pictures or fucking Fire Down Under from Riot. Putting it over those 2 would have been blasphemy, because of this is not a bad record, but compared to those 2, those I think had more, I can get more mileage out of doing those on their anniversary days. But this one, since it's usually considered, depending on who you ask, it's either considered one of the better of this era of Rainbow, or it's the worst of this era of Rainbow, or just in Rainbow in general. I don't think that it's a bad record at all. It's just not really Richie Blackmore's finest moment. It's not. So it's an alright album. That's where I'm stopping there. So it's a good record, and there's plenty of good musicianship. Don Airey's great on here. Roger Glover's fucking good. I mean, it's Roger Glover. Of course, Richie Blackmore does provide some great guitar stuff. He still is Richie Blackmore, right? And of course, Bob Ronanelli is actually a perfect drummer. Actually, apparently at one point, he was apparently eyed or was somewhat picked to be the replacement for Peter Criss and Kiss. However, the way Eric Carr put it, Eric Carr was a much better singer compared to Bob Ronanelli, so that's why Bob Ronanelli was dropped and it went in favor of Eric Carr, and of course probably rightfully so. But here, as a part of Rainbow, he's a fucking good fit. He actually can drum pretty good. I wouldn't say he's anywhere close to like Cozy Powell in terms of level of musicianship as a drummer, but he's good. He keeps his beat. And on a song like Spotlight Kid and maybe on Difficult to Cure, he's a great drummer. He actually really he does keep up a good fucking pace, and he's good. He's got good rhythm. He's and in many reasons why he was chosen for Richie Blackmore here. So he was good. So really great musicianships here. Yes, Jolan Turner. He's a good vocalist. He's very smooth. He's again in his voice, but at the same time, when people are thinking of Richie Blackmore, he's going to be at least at the bottom tier of at least top vocalists that have at least had sang with Ritchie Blackmore. Depending on diehard fans, they're either going to put up Ian Gillan, David Coverdale, and Ronnie James Dio, and maybe even Graham Bonnet in there. That's all. So Joe Lynn Turner's fine, but the thing is, he just sounds a lot like Lou Gramm of Foreigner. And for those who are just not really fans of Foreigner, he just ends up leading a bit of a cold taste to them. It's just very cold in that sort of regard. But he's all right. He does good for the songs that at least he's fitted for. So I'm going to at least stop there. All right, so after this, or also I should definitely, I was going to actually talk about at least the artwork for the sound, because I know that this is going on pretty long, but I have to get this in here. The artwork for Difficult to Cure, while it was done by, of course, Hypnosis, one of the most famous designing companies in the world for a lot of the rock bands. I mean, Pink Floyd, UFO, and even AC/DC, because they did the international version of Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. They provide that artwork, even though that's actually my least favorite artwork that Hypnosis have done. Because of, again, when it comes to AC/DC, I prefer the Australian artwork for Dirty Deeds than over the one that Hypnosis did. But they did some great artwork. This one is interesting, and this one's got an interesting backstory. If you haven't heard the backstory, then you're gonna be a little bit surprised by this one. Originally, when Hypnosis was putting this artwork together, their idea in mind was to provide this artwork to Black Sabbath for Never Say Die. Yes, you're hearing that correctly. This was supposed to have been the artwork for Never Say Die. However, Tony Iommi didn't really care for the artwork here. Instead, he wanted to go with the artwork that was eventually used with the jet pilots, with those crazy masks, which were actually really early plane masks. I think a lot of them used in the early, I think during maybe World War I or World War II. I think that period of time, they were the earliest those masks that a lot of them used, the air pilots used. So he went with that artwork, but I think it's never been quite told here on whether or not if how Ritchie Blackmore got a hold of the artwork, whether or not Hypnosis was the one that decided, all right, let's give it to Ritchie Blackmore instead, or Tony Iommi must have somehow had a night out with Ritchie Blackmore, and I guess maybe during all the drinking, probably told him, that artwork, we almost must have went into a conversation about the supposed artwork for Never Say Die, and I think that Ritchie Blackmore must have wanted to take a look at it, and it's like, I'm using that artwork, I'm using it. So it's not quite determined how the Hypnosis artwork was chosen for the album. Maybe this is why I think Ritchie Blackmore decided to go with it. I think I could buy the story of him hanging out with Ritchie Blackmore, hanging out with Tony Iommi, and just somehow the topic or the conversation of the supposed unused artwork for Never Say Die that Hypnosis put together. Ritchie Blackmore must have been completely taken back by that, must have liked the artwork and decided he's going to use it. I mean, why would he have also chosen to name the fucking Beethoven's Night track in a Difficult to Cure? And why would he have chosen that title for the artwork? Because it's got the fucking all the doctors and their patients and whatnot. So I think that story is more believable than just the fact that I think Hypnosis just wanted to slap the artwork onto the album. So there. This was originally going to be the artwork for Never Say Die, but yet it got used for this one. So there you go. There's the backstory behind the artwork for Difficult to Cure by Rainbow. Okay, so that's where we now are after this album. Well, to get into that, I think they tour for this album, but I think eventually of course, I think there might have been another lineup change as well to it. Yeah, yeah, that was be another lineup change, because Don Airey, I think, would leave the band to go on and think either do stuff with other bands, and again, he would get replaced by David Rosenthal. So that's the he would replace Don Airey, and that would be for the upcoming album in 1982, being Straight Between the Eyes. And then, of course, on to the album, the final Rainbow album for a long time in 1983, which is Bent Out of Shape. The lineup for that one would, of course, would then be, again, taking over the drums of Bob Ronanelli would be Chuck Berge. That would be it. That would be the final album for Ritchie Blackmore and Rainbow, because eventually he would go on and be a part of the reformation of the Mach 2 lineup of Deep Purple, and that is saved for another time, because of that's that is pretty much a horror story, I guess you can say. Just a absolute nightmare story in its own. So that's where we're leaving things. So there we go. Difficult to Cure, released on February 3rd of 1981, so it's reached its 40th anniversary. If you have any memories of this album, whether they have been positive or negative, you can leave them in the comment section below. But if you haven't heard this album, well, if you're getting into Rainbow, I wouldn't start with this album. Instead, I would at least start with at least any of the classic sort of Dio era Rainbow albums. That would be my sort of, just my personal opinion to start with, okay? But still, if you want to get a good, at least a decent idea of what this era of Rainbow is, Difficult to Cure is not a bad album, actually. It's not. It's not the finest hour, but it's not a bad album. I can still listen to it, and again, I do have a lot of soft spots for it. So there you go. So you can take my word or just my opinion with a grain of salt. Okay, whatever. All right, so that's it. I've talked on for a lot. This was a long Album of the Week episode. It was a long one. So, where do I really begin? I guess this is where I'll then announce what's going to be next week's Album of the Week episode. So what's going to be next week's Album of the Week pick, which would be episode number 110. It is going to be Juggernaut of Justice by Anvil. Yes, for him with another heavy hitter there. Another good one. Again, more modern Anvil. Since I already talked about Plenty of Power, it's on to that one. So, there we go. Hope all of you are looking forward to me talking about Juggernaut of Justice. So with that, again, I hope all of you enjoyed this Album of the Week episode. So with that, hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrash at Sam out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.